You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. As Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. Going to do. All right, folks, down to our next story. Yesterday, I got this email in my inbox right here that says, EBONY Magazine announces leadership transition. Willard Jackson to step down as CEO. Now, Willard Jackson has been the part of the CVG group, the group that actually bought EBONY Magazine, acquiring it from Lyndon Johnson Rice, of course, the daughter of John H. Johnson. This is what the statement actually says. The board of directors, individually and collectively, understands the legacy and value of EBONY to black communities globally, said Jacob Walthour Jr., newly elected chairman of the EBONY's board of directors and co-founder of Blueprint Capital Advisors, a black-owned asset manager. Founder John H. Johnson conducted himself in EBONY business with a level of class, integrity, and honor that has come to define black professionalism in America. While the board expects that EBONY will always need to adapt its business model to stay relevant, it must never compromise the core values of Mr. Johnson. Joining us right now is Jacob Walthour Jr. Glad to have you here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So in your announcement yesterday, you announced that several weeks ago, the board commissioned an independent inquiry into a number of transactions led by Mr. Jackson, and the investigation is ongoing. Was that the reason why you and others asked him to step down? And then was he voted down, or did he voluntarily step down?
On Thursday, July 2nd, the board actually came together and voted to effect a leadership change at EBONY Media Holdings, which required the removal of Mr. Jackson.
And so that was a board vote that actually led that. And so did he vote? Right.
As the press release indicated, we are certainly in the middle of an independent review of a number of transactions, both corporate and personal. And we felt as a board there was enough there at this particular moment in time to go ahead and remove Mr. Jackson from the position of CEO, as well as from the board of EBONY Media Holdings.
So CVG is the company that acquired the assets. So CVG owns EBONY Magazine and owns those particular assets. Your company, exactly what is your role in this for people who don't quite understand these various transactions?
I am on the board of EBONY Media Holdings, and I chair the board of EBONY Media Holdings. I am on the board because my company, Blueprint Capital Advisors, controls the senior debt of EBONY Media Holdings. So we are the senior lender in a first lien position on EBONY Media Holdings.
Now, the previous company, Parkview, you guys took that over. Did you take over that company because they filed for bankruptcy? Correct?
Parkview did not file for bankruptcy.
Okay.
So we took over for Parkview, and Parkview had a number of companies in its portfolio. Parkview was the senior lender, and one of those companies was EBONY Media Holdings. So we took over for Parkview on April 29th.
So your company assumed all of those different the companies that they were financing. Correct. Okay. So you came in, you said that took place on April 29th. You then came on the board. What were the red flags that you immediately saw or began to ask questions about where you said, hey, something is amiss here? Because EBONY has been having significant issues since CVG took it over. You've had lawsuits from writers who didn't get paid. You've had constant negative headlines. Folks are even asking, where's the print publication? They haven't seen it. That was supposed to be their Power 100 event that's supposed to take place in March at Tyler Perry Studios. That was canceled. And so folks are saying, what the heck has happened to what used to be a crown jewel in black media?
Sure. I will agree with you that EBONY used to be a crown jewel. And, you know, if we have anything to do with it, the new board, then certainly it will be a crown jewel again. And we feel that, honestly, now more than ever, the voice of EBONY is necessary so that black people can tell their story. no other time since the civil rights movement have we needed an Ebony more. And so we're looking forward to a restructuring of Ebony, looking at all of the businesses that Ebony is currently in, assessing whether it makes sense for them to continue those individual lines of business, and then thinking about kind of what Ebony will look like as a business model for the next 75 years. But to get back to your question, Roland, as board members, we have a fiduciary responsibility. You carry out that fiduciary responsibility by asking hard questions, not softball questions, really hard questions. And as we ask questions of the senior management team, including Mr. Jackson, we just found we weren't getting the level of transparency that we would normally get from someone who was involved in transactions at the level that Mr. Jackson was involved. And when you can't get firm answers, that really is the beginning of the red flags going up. Because anyone who runs a company should be able to tell you who the counterparties are, should be able to tell you the terms of the transaction, why the transaction makes sense for the company. And so we couldn't get details on the transactions. What we also learned was that a number of these transactions also did not go through the proper protocol. Transactions have to be approved at the board level, and a number of these transactions were not approved at the board level. Those were the corporate transactions. Then there was a series of personal transactions. As you know, when you are the CEO of a company, what you do personally can very often impact the company that you run. I mean, you have to be above a reproach. And there were a number of transactions that he was involved in personally that caused us to be very concerned about how those transactions might impact the image of this crown jewel, as you put it.
Speaking of that, when you talk about, are you at liberty to discuss what those transactions were?
So we can't go into extensive detail on the transactions. I will say that there are a number of transactions that we're looking into. Again, some of those transactions involved Ebony and Ebony getting into contractual relationships with various entities that the board knew nothing about. And some of those transactions were personal in nature, where either by way of a board seat or pursuing his entrepreneurial urge, he got himself into a number of businesses which we think could ultimately have a reputational impact on Ebony Media.
So who actually owns Ebony? Because Michael Gibson was part of CVG. Is he still, so you remove Willard Jackson from the board of directors. Is Michael Gibson still involved with CVG? Is he still on the board of directors?
Gibson is still on the board of directors. Michael Gibson is still one of the founding partners, managing partners of CVG. In the work that we had done up to this point, we had no reason to believe that Michael Gibson was involved in the transactions that are going to be the work of the independent review. And so Michael will remain on the board.
So Michael's still on the board of directors. So CVG is still owning or operating whatever there is of Ebony. That is social media, websites, things along those lines. Is anything actually happening? Are they producing anything, or is everything at a standstill?
As an industry, I mean, the magazine business has been a really tough business.
Right.
Ebony has probably had a tougher time than most in the magazine business. Nowadays, to survive, you need real scale. And as a fully integrated magazine business, it was very difficult to turn a profit. And that is one of the three pillars. So you have magazines, or what we call the print business. You have digital, which is basically your social media. And then you have events, which was Power 100. So print, in all likelihood, will not come back as people know it. The world of print has changed dramatically. The cost of print is exorbitant if you're an individual magazine as opposed to a conglomerate of magazines like Condé Nast or American Media. And so what we'll look at is doing special editions around certain events. So maybe it's 2 or 3 publications a year as opposed to printing one every single month. With respect to digital platform, Ebony did not convert to digital as fast as most did. And that's really sad because when you really think about it, Roland, Jet Magazine was the first publication to really offer people news in really small doses. I mean, John Johnson really led the industry in condensing a story into 2 paragraphs. And when you read Jet Magazine, it took you all about 25 to 30 minutes to consume it. Unfortunately, that format was never converted to digital, so the company didn't have, commercial success on the back of that vision that he had. So we're really excited about the digital platform. Even though the brand has gone through a tough time for the last 3 or 4 years, it still is the #1 Black brand in the world, and it is possible for it to make a resurgence if it has the right management team and the right resources behind it. The third business is the event business.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The third business is the event business, and that's where you have your Power 100. And I think what we'd like to do there is figure out how to bring Ebony to the local level in major metropolitan areas around the country and replicating the success that we had around Power 100, which was only held once a year. There are far more than 100 African Americans that need to be honored each and every year. And I think we'd like to figure out how to do that in Detroit, in Los Angeles, in Atlanta, and New York City, and other cities where we have large concentrations of African Americans that need to be showcased nationally and globally.
But obviously, COVID-19 greatly impacts that because there are no events happening all across the country. Essence Festivals, they just had their virtual conference as well. And so Black Enterprise, they've said that, frankly, without their conferences, they're not in business. That's in peril as well because there are no events. And so, we don't know what's even going to happen in that space.
We don't know what's going to happen in that space. And I think that, honestly, it means that there's pressure on us to tap into our creativity and to find new verticals. And so one of the things we're thinking about is taking that iconic brand and moving into licensing and merchandising, right, as a potential vertical for the company. Low capital intensity ways to continue to bring the brand to Black America and others that will allow us to turn a profit, on our efforts.
I just got a text message from Willard Jackson saying, quote, "I absolutely refute the allegation that I have not been fully transparent with Ebony's board of directors regarding any and all transactions. I look forward to clearing my name and reputation regarding these allegations. I have directed this matter to my attorney."
I'm not really sure what you want me to say, Roland. I assure you that the board deliberated this decision and used information that they found to be very pertinent to making this kind of decision. And so, we didn't take the decision lightly. No one has anything personal against Willard. Willard has a lot of strengths as a leader. I think that, as the statement said, Ebony, as a brand, has always come to be associated with quality, honor, integrity, and on a going forward basis, that's the way we'd like this business to be conducted.
I do have to ask you this here. You said this action was taken on Thursday by the board. Yet I received this email Friday, then went out to media all across the country, and it actually has Ebony on the in this email was sent by Sabrina Taylor, a publicist, I assume with Ebony Magazine, and it was a news conference, a virtual news conference that dealt with asking for a commutation of Kwame Kilpatrick. And in reading this is what it says. The press conference is organized and hosted by Ebony, whose new co-owner, Robert Shoemake, is leading the brand's involvement in social justice causes, including mass incarceration of blacks and economic justice for the nation's black farmers. Is Robert Shoemake a co-owner of Ebony?
So Robert Shoemake and Willard Jackson actually together were interested in buying out Michael Gibson's share of Ebony that he owned through CVG. And that is one of the transactions that the independent review is taking a look at. That transaction was completed without board approval. It was completed without approval from Parkview, the senior lender to the organization that had veto rights over that transaction. And so that is one of the transactions that the independent counsel is taking a look at. And we won't know the answer to that question, whether or not Robert Shoemake is an owner of Ebony until they complete their work.
So you were not aware of this arrangement prior to taking over the debt of Parkview?
Actually, we took over April 29th. The existence of Robert Shoemake as a potential owner of Ebony was made aware to us about 3 weeks after we took over. As I indicated to you, Parkview was supposed to approve that transaction, but Parkview was never asked to approve that transaction, so it had no idea that this deal actually existed.
I do have to ask you also about this here because, and this is actually a graphic here. This was a particular initiative that Ebony was involved with, a marketing campaign for criminal justice and social reform, and it involved the cannabis space. And so what happened was, of course, they approached us from an advertising deal to be able to sort of advertise this cannabis crowd fund. There were two. One was Bonji, another was 420 Real Estate. And Willard Jackson and Robert Shoemake were involved with that. To your knowledge, does 420 Real Estate have any connection to? And because one of the issues there is that a lot of people who watch my show, they actually gave money to the crowd fund, and they've been asking for answers, and some of them say they have not been getting answers. I did talk to Robert Shoemake today, who said they have a call center. They've been actually taking people's questions and answering their questions. But is 420 Real Estate, this cannabis crowd fund, is that actually a Ebony deal? Was there a partnership? Anything with that?
A declarative statement here that Ebony Media Holdings, Bonji, and 420 have no affiliation on a formal basis. You happen to mention two of the transactions that are also subject to review by the independent counsel that is looking into these transactions. As I mentioned, there are a number of corporate transactions, of which one of the transactions is the transaction that was done with Mr. Shoemake to purchase a portion of Ebony without board authorization and without senior lender authorization. And other transactions that we're looking at are the Bongi transaction as well as the 420 transaction. Those transactions were done by Mr. Jackson personally. However, we do feel for a number of reasons that our independent counsel should be looking at those transactions as well.
Well, and again, for the purpose of it, for you and also our audience, for them, they had stopped. We were doing this advertising campaign, and payment had been stopped. And so we stopped running those live reads, and I then began to ask questions like exactly what is this, what's going on, and I'm still not clear in terms of these two different crowd funds, who's connected, who's doing what, and I've asked both of them very clearly that I want to make sure that the people who watch this show, who gave to that crowd fund, are going to be made whole, and then their answers are questioned. And so clearly in what you guys are doing with your investigation, again, to me, those questions need to be asked because as African Americans, this is a reality. This was an advertiser who came to us. This was a crowd fund. We serve a black audience. Ebony serves a black audience. I think the most important thing across the board is that we ensure the integrity that black people are not being taken advantage of, and that when someone promises something, it actually gets done. Because that matters to us, that matters, I think, to the constituents. And we can't talk about black power and black progress if black folks can't trust one another?
I completely agree with you. I feel like we ought to switch roles. As I mentioned, we are looking at a number of these transactions using an independent counsel. And one of the reasons why we decided to use an independent counsel was because of the complexity of all of this. Clearly, the lines had blurred between corporate and the personal. And business that was personal in nature was leveraging the corporate brand as well as the corporate assets to actually, be legitimized. And so I assure you that on a going forward basis, as long as I'm on the board and involved in Ebony Media Holdings, those types of things will not occur. Ultimately, I think that, the sponsors of those transactions that you mentioned will have to answer to their investors. It is my understanding that, they have had successful crowdfunding fundraisers, but I've yet to hear kind of, how much success has been had, in terms of those business entities actually pursuing their business plans. And so, I think that you're spot on when you say that, this sort of black people taking advantage of black people, that certainly can't be allowed to exist. And to use another black person like yourself to facilitate that certainly makes it even worse. What I will say to you is that on a going forward basis, Ebony will be managed and will make decisions in a way that African Americans can be proud. John Johnson, to me, embodied black professionalism. I'm a small town boy, grew up in upstate New York, a poor town with 6,000 people. Without Ebony Magazine, I never would have had a window into what black people could accomplish in sports, in entertainment, in politics, in a bunch of different fields, including education. So Ebony means a lot. It inspires kids in corners of the world where they can't see real live examples of African American success. And I want to make sure that what it did for me and my forebears for the last 75 years is done for the future generations over the course of the next 75 years.
Just a couple of more questions. First, are you currently seeking a new CEO, or are you waiting for the investigation to come to a conclusion before you lay out what the next steps should be?
So we have an operating committee that consists of some external people, some internal people, and we are looking at, kind of all aspects of Ebony, but really focused on making sure we are here for the whole Black Lives Matters movement, right? And so a lot of those folks are focused on, how do we get kind of new and interesting content and capture this moment. I don't want to bring a new CEO on board until our house is clean, okay? Mm-hmm. And so we'll let the independent review run its course. We've said, look, you need to move forward with all deliberate speed, but at the same time, you need to be able to be thorough in your work. And so there's always that balance, Roland. I don't think, as I said, we should bring a CEO on board until everything is cleaned up. And their focus is not on cleanup. It is on how do we stabilize the organization and how do we grow the organization? What lines of business should we be pursuing, et cetera, et cetera. Because a lot of what you find in the media business is collaboration nowadays. You need partners to be successful in the media business. Mm-hmm. And if Ebony is not viewed as an A quality partner, then we're not going to have the kind of opportunities that we want to have on a going forward basis. So we need to clean our house up.
Jacob, you also, in your press release, you said this here. As part of the board's engagement, they are prioritizing the payment of delinquent compensation to Ebony employees and expect to make announcements soon. First off, how many employees are actually still with the company? You still have writers out there who say they have not been paid. Mm-hmm. And so have you gotten a handle on what all this outstanding debt is? Because I've heard from former employees who are angry, who say they had not been paid since November or December, and we now are 7 months into 2020.
Sure. So a lot of this occurred before we got involved and before I
Right.
came onto the board of Ebony. And I recently asked for an accounting of the monies that are owed. And I was given, a very, very long spreadsheet. And I looked at the spreadsheet and I said, are you kidding me? We owe people $100. We've owed people $300 for, God knows how long. There's got to be a way for us to start to fix this. And so before I'd asked that question, we were perfectly happy just to sit back and let the lawyers continue to litigate this. When the reality of it is that we have an obligation, especially during COVID-19, when African Americans are dipping into their savings to put cash in people's hands if we can. And so what I've proposed is that we engage the attorneys in thinking about a creative way to start to pay this down. In other words, put money into a trust. And at such time as someone says, I need it, pay it to them. If they don't want to wait out the litigation, let them drop off and get what's owed to them so that they can go on their way and move on with their life and get their payment. I understand at the end of the day that this is the kind of thing that's small, but it can fester, right? Someone owes you a small amount of money for a long period of time and you don't get any answers. It does nothing other than really make you upset.
Oh no,
But
it's
I
actually
think
it's gone public big time, and a lot of they've asked the National Association of Black Journalists, which I'm VP of Digital, to get involved. We've got involved in the past. You've had Writers Guild. You've had all these different people who have been saying, and look, get these folks paid. And again, as a African American, somebody who's freelanced before, somebody who really needed that $200-300 check, man, that means something when you don't get it.
Correct. No, you feel violated. There's no question you feel violated. So what I am saying is I am committed to coming up with a creative solution. That's what financial services firms like mine does, to start getting people what they are owed so that we can get that really long list down to a very short list. My understanding is that, there are somewhere between 6 and 26 people, Roland. And we've got to figure out the exact number and exactly who is owed money. But I can't see any reason why, like a credit card debt, when you owe something, sometimes you got to pay it off in small amounts, and we need to consider doing it.
Right, and look, there are some people who are owed upwards of $100,000, and so people have been asking and saying, "Hey, what the hell has been going on? What has been happening?" I was made aware from external sources that the Republican National Committee had took out a significant ad buy with Ebony, and you got to ask the question: where did that money go, and why didn't it go to employees to pay for expenses? And so I certainly look forward to having Willard Jackson, Robert Shoemake on to explain all of this as well. I certainly look forward to having you back on as well. The absolute last question for you: is it concerning for you that you don't know what you don't know? Or is this investigation, this independent investigation, is it intended to get a firm handle on any and all deals? And that way, you got everything in front of you. Now it's like, okay, here's a plan of action, as opposed to executing a plan of action, and all of a sudden, oh my God, a new debtor claim comes in. Is bankruptcy a potential to reorganize the debt of Ebony Media Holdings?
Any and all options are on the table to strengthen Ebony Media Holdings. So let me be really clear about that. Each and every day we learn new things. We're still in that phase of our independent review. And just this morning, I learned something new about a transaction, and I had to refer that over to the independent counsel. So the answer that I would love to give you is that we are almost there in terms of wrapping this up. But the bottom line is that, we have a lot more work to do to get our arms around everything that has gone on, at Ebony Media Holdings. And I will say this, that the employees that are left have been extremely loyal. I'm very thankful to how they've handled themselves as we've gone through this review. Some of them have been paid, some of them haven't. And so it just goes to tell you that they love this brand that much that they want to continue to give to it. And I'm convinced that, if we can get this all behind us and recapitalize the firm, that it'll be around for another 75 years. And it'll be a major player in recording the voice of African Americans.
Well, as someone who knew Mr. Johnson, who knew Lyndon Johnson Rice, knew Eunice Johnson, wrote for Ebony, someone who read it, we certainly appreciate your honesty and candor. You're certainly welcome to come back anytime. And again, for me, as I expressed, I've been asking questions now for 5 months when it came to my viewers. It was an advertising deal, so that's all. We had no other involvement, but I still want to ensure, like anybody else, like I want those writers to ensure they're going to get paid. I want to ensure that those African Americans who gave to that crowdfunding campaign are going to be dealt with respect. And so I've made that perfectly clear to Robert Shoemake. I made that perfectly clear to Willard Jackson and anybody else involved, and they know that. And I tend to hold them to their word that they will be taken care of, just like I'm sure you will.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Jacob
Roland.
Walthour Jr. I appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
All right, folks, back to that Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
All right, the folks at Ceek.com, folks, with a partnership with them, they have these great, unbelievable headphones. Mary Spiel, a sister, she's the inventor of these 360-degree 4D headphones. Man, whether you want to listen to music, whether you want to watch movies, whether you want to use them for gaming, or even take phone calls, they're absolutely fantastic. They also have their virtual reality headset, where you can actually just place your phone right into here. If you go to their site, or go to their app, Ceek.com, or even if you go to YouTube, look at 360-degree videos. It's pretty cool. And so all you gotta do is go to Ceek.com, CEEK.com. Use the promo code RMVIP2020, RMVIP2020. That's all you got to do to get a discount off of these items here.